Coming soon from the PBS NewsHour, our first original podcast series, The Last Continent. A 4-part journey to the icy continent of Antarctica. Meet the curious creatures that live there. And the equally curious people who study them.
Now look at them go underwater. Zoom, zoom, zoom. You look.
I know, it's incredible.
Literally flying underwater. This guy's amazing.
It's a first-hand look at how climate change is transforming this distant continent. Theoretically, ocean water could get in under the edge of the glacier and undermine it from below as well.
More than theoretically. In fact, we know that's occurring in parts of West Antarctica and East Antarctica. This system is overall out of balance.
And how it could impact our lives thousands of miles away.
That much sea level rise would be very, very difficult and expensive to defend against.
And learn about the things they don't tell you about getting there. This is dinner in the middle of the Drake's Passage. The ship is lurching from side to side.
Get ready for the rollback.
I mean, it was nuts. It was really nuts.
There was one night where I literally came out of bed. So.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah.
How did we even get here?
This is a period of a lot of these really good adventure stories.
And why do we keep going back?
Antarctica is really the world's last great wilderness.
The whole front portion came out. All right.
I think it's absolutely incredible that our 7th continent, our newest continent, was discovered less than 200 years ago, changing what we understand about the globe today.
All 4 episodes of The Last Continent drop April 24th. Subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts. I'm on the deck of a big white cruise ship that's full of tourists. We're all headed to Antarctica, but right now,
Good God!
I'm just hoping to make it through today. The wind is blowing so hard it'll knock you over if you don't hold on tight. The waves are big and rolling. They're 1 or 2 stories high. Some of them break over the front of the ship as it pitches up and down with each swell. Inside at dinner, it's not much better. The dining room is half empty. Most of the passengers are stuck in their rooms, seasick. The few of us who are here are holding on to our plates and glasses and forks.
Get ready for the rollback.
Because everything is sliding and falling off the fancy white tablecloths. We're in the middle of the notorious Drake Passage, just off the southern tip of South America. My colleagues Emily Carpo and Mike Fritz are here too, and after the trip, they had the same thought I did. We were not warned it was going to be like this.
I don't remember being really prepped at all, other than, I remember even looking on their website, and as the itinerary said something along the lines of, on day 2, wake to the gentle rolling of the Drake Passage.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
The gentle rolling.
Oh, my God, we should find that on their website because I forgot. You remember you showed that to me, and I was like,
That is a euphemism.
That's false advertising.
There was one night where I literally came out of bed, and I was sleeping right next to you because we had the pleasure of sharing a room on this trip.
He means me.
And you were like, good God, you just fall out of bed. I was like, I think so.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah, and then I got up and I got some water and I was able to go back to sleep. But that was quite an experience to try to sleep in that.
Welcome on board the RCGS Resolute.
From the PBS NewsHour, this is The Last Continent, a 4-part journey to Antarctica. I'm William Brangham. Okay, back to the ship. We set off on our trip from the southern end of Argentina. We passed Cape Horn and then headed south. That's where we entered the Drake. It's a 600-mile-long channel between South America and Antarctica where the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean converge into what's called the Southern Ocean.
Yeah, the last time I crossed going south, we had someone that was tossed out of their bunk and ended up in their bathroom.
Thrown out of their bed.
Yeah. It's not a good thing to tell people that have paid thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars.
Alexandra Eisern has crossed the Drake Passage many times. She oversees all the Antarctic science that's done through the National Science Foundation. They fund scientific research all over the world and occasionally fund some NewsHour reporting as well. Eisern is clearly a lot tougher than we are because she usually goes in ships that are a lot less fancy and a lot less stabilized than the one we took. Why is it so rough?
Essentially, the Southern Ocean is like a big river around the bottom of the Earth because it has no barriers. So if you look at a map, there's a real pinch point between the Antarctic Peninsula and South America. And as a result, you get very fast-moving storms, but they create, because of this constraint, very turbulent seas. And so anyone that tells you it's not a big deal, it's not telling the truth.
Can we just talk about showering on that boat? I mean, I definitely almost fell off the toilet once.
Just from the pitching of the cabin.
Like, they need to put, like, a harness in the shower or something. I'm serious.
Again, I think that kind of defeats the whole luxury tourist ethos.
But doesn't also, like, cracking your skull open?
Or like urinating everywhere. I could have gone for a harness.
Totally natural. Showering in a full harness.
I mean, it was nuts.
It was nuts.
It was really nuts.
Those are the albatrosses. Down in the water are petrels, and then there were some Magellanic penguins. Oh, the penguins are jumping.
We're on this cruise ship with about 140 tourists, all part of the mini tourism boom that's going on in Antarctica.
Cool.
About 52,000 people took this trip last year. Sure, that's not that many people. The Empire State Building handles that many in less than a week. But it's a record for Antarctica, and the numbers keep growing.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, folks. If I could just have your attention.
That's David McGonigal. He works for One Ocean Expeditions, and he's leading our trip. He says the real tourism boom began when the Cold War ended. Suddenly, there was a surplus of Soviet ships with thick, reinforced hulls that could handle icy waters.
When the Soviet Union collapsed, the Soviet fleet of ice-strengthened vessels became available, and people realized they could actually charter those and bring those down. And there was that was what started the whole rush in the 1990s.
The tourists on our trip are from all over: the US, the UK, Australia, Malaysia, Japan. And this is not budget travel. They've each had to pay about $12,000 to $20,000 for this 2-week cruise. Once we get to Antarctica, there will be hiking and kayaking and taking other excursions to see the penguins and the other wildlife.
Take a look out on the port side of the ship forward. And
everyone's crowded around because there's about 3 or 4 humpback whales just off the front of the ship. Most of the passengers on the ship are sporting some seriously big cameras. Some have lenses that are as long as my arm. When any wildlife gets spotted, everyone rushes to that side of the ship to get their shot.
How many Canon lenses does it take to photograph a whale?
not enough.
Not enough.
It's worth the Drake's Passage, the rolling and the washing, machining before you get there.
Among our shipmates is Yusuf Hashim from Malaysia. He's a 73-year-old retired oil executive. He has this beautifully long, flowing head of white hair, and he too wears an enormous camera around his neck. This is his 4th trip to Antarctica.
I think this is a very beautiful place, and I will never tire of looking at icebergs and penguins. It makes it all worth living.
Yossi Silverman from San Francisco says he came on this trip to shut out the outside world.
Seemed like everything else was going wrong this year. Going to the end of the world seemed like the right thing to do.
Was this something you've always wanted to do, or you just came to this idea more recently?
We're very keen on open spaces and solitude, finding ourselves.
John and Hermione Roth are from Northern England. He's an Anglican minister. She's a family therapist.
And you have these ideas about Antarctica, and you hear about the beauty of it, and we wanted to come and see it before either it disappeared or we disappeared.
Well, thank you for coming along this afternoon. The title of the presentation is a little vague. Opening up Antarctica.
To round out the tourist experience, many companies, including One Ocean, hire historians to travel on their ships and give lectures to fill in some of the backstory of the icy continent. Katie Murray from Scotland is the historian on our ship.
A lot of people are attracted by the history. They've read the great stories of Shackleton, of Scott and Amundsen, and they want to come and see the arena. They want to come and see what Antarctica, where all these stories were played out, is actually like. When the first explorers got to Antarctica, as far as we know, they really were the first men to set eyes on the continent. And when they set foot or discovered...
If you know one fact about the history of Antarctica, it's probably something about the famous British explorer Ernest Shackleton.
Some ways before we actually left, I came into work one day and there was this book on my desk from you, William. And it was a book about Shackleton, which I think ended up just putting the fear of God in me a little bit.
That was the point.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I got that.
You had inscribed.
Oh, yeah. What did you inscribe in there
You
again?
inscribed ICE team member Mike. Read this and pray we experience nothing of the sort. WB. And then I read the back, and then I was like, good God, where are we going?
Shackleton is one of the legends of what's called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. He's famous not so much for what he discovered, but for the crazy feat of survival he pulled off under just incredibly tough circumstances. Back in 1914, Shackleton set off with a team of 28 men, traveling south on a ship called the Endurance. It looked like your typical turn-of-the-century wooden sailing ship, 3 masts, 124 feet long, 35 feet wide. But she was sturdy and built for icy waters. Shackleton's goal was to land and then cross the entire continent. They'd be the very first to do that. But before the men even reached Antarctica, the Endurance got stuck in sea ice. Antarctica grows a massive halo of sea ice around its perimeter in the wintertime. The continent literally doubles in size because of it. And that ice grabbed a hold of the Endurance and didn't let go. The ship was stuck for 10 months. There's some incredible photos that show the Endurance frozen in place. They were taken by the expedition's photographer, Frank Hurley. Google them, they are amazing. Hurley's last photo of the Endurance shows it being crushed to pieces by the ice. The ship is an unrecognizable clump of wood, rope, and sails. That book I gave Mike and Emily about Shackleton is Alfred Lansing's 1959 classic called Endurance. Here's how Lansing describes the scene when the men are standing on the ice watching the Endurance finally sink.
Then slowly, silently, she disappeared beneath the ice, leaving only a small gap of black, open water to mark where she'd been.
This is Mike reading.
Within 60 seconds, even that was gone, as the ice closed up again. It had all happened in 10 minutes. And so they were alone. Now in every direction, there was nothing to be seen but the endless ice. A place where no man had ever been before, nor could they conceive that any man would ever want to be again.
When the worst happens and your ship goes down and you're still at least 1,000 kilometers from the edge of the open ocean, no help is coming for you, you need to rescue yourself effectively, and you manage to do so, that's absolutely incredible.
I won't tell the whole story of how Shackleton and his men survived, but it is one of those all-time great survival tales. Lansing's book tells it beautifully. You should read it. But in short, those men spent over a year on the ice. They had to eat their dogs. They pulled off 2 long ocean crossings in tiny boats. Then they climbed a snowy mountain range with no maps. And they finally reached a remote Norwegian whaling station where they could get on a ship back home. And remember, they did all this with no Gore-Tex, no polar fleece. They were sleeping in the bitter cold, on the ice, in slimy sleeping bags made out of reindeer skin. The whole thing just defies description. In 2002, when the BBC polled the people of England to name the top 100 Britons of all time, Ernest Shackleton was number 11. ahead of Paul McCartney, who was number 19, and way ahead of Charles Dickens, all the way down at 41. They now teach lessons about Shackleton's leadership at Harvard Business School and at the U.S. Naval Academy. And here we are.
Cheers, Tom.
Cheers.
Traveling the same Southern Ocean that Shackleton did, but we're doing it in a luxury cruise ship with yoga classes and cocktails and a hot tub. And the conditions that we're traveling under are not that dissimilar from Shackleton, right? Right?
Have you been enjoying your reindeer sleeping bag?
Oh, it's so comfortable. Even when it gets wet, it's fine.
It's quite
On the next episode, we reach the icy continent.
Whoa!
And meet the penguins who live there, as well as the man who's counted millions of these birds.
Look at them go. Underwater. Zoom, zoom, zoom. You look.
I know, it's incredible.
Literally flying underwater.
How climate change is threatening two beloved species.
There are going to be climate change winners, and there's going to be some climate change losers.
That's on the next episode of The Last Continent. If you want to see Antarctica and meet the tourists from our trip and see Shackleton and his gang, visit our website, pbs.org/newshour/thelastcontinent. There you can find our video series that first aired on the NewsHour broadcast, plus other photographs and extras. And to hear all 4 episodes of The Last Continent, make sure to subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Last Continent was produced by Vika Aronson, Mike Fritz, Emily Carpeau, and me, William Brangham. Editing by Erica R. Hendry. Production assistance by Chris Ford. Fact-checking was done by Sikon Akpan, Maya Lene Bura, Amber Partida, and Zoe Rorick. Music by Blue Dot Sessions. Special thanks to Travis Daub, Vanessa Dennis, Brennan Butler, Stefan Rode, James Williams, Julia Griffin, Dan Cooney, Dima Zane, Malia Posey, Adam Saraf, and Laura Strum. Thanks also to Dan Devaney and Bruce Kane at WETA-FM. Sarah Just is our executive producer. Thanks so much for listening. And please don't forget to let us know what you think of the show. Tweet us at NewsHour or leave us a review in Apple Podcasts.
Oh my God, I really am going to vomit. I got to get out of here.
We're on Cooverville Island on the Antarctic Peninsula, standing smack dab in the middle of a bustling colony of Gentoo penguins. It's like a little penguin Times Square. A dozen or so stand along the beach. Dozens more are waddling up and down the steep hill above us, struggling to stay upright on their little orange feet. At both ends of the beach, hundreds are packed together, sitting in the sun on their homemade rocky nests. This is industrial-scale penguin life. But for Ron Naveen, it's just another day at the office.
Bingo.
This 73-year-old, white-haired, white-bearded man is walking gingerly on the rocks. He's got an old-fashioned clicker counter in his hands, and he's doing what he's been doing for almost 40 years, counting penguins.
Oh. Hi, buddy.
Back in the 1980s, Ron created an advocacy group called Oceanites. Its mission is to track and monitor the 3 main species that live here.
I've gone through all kinds of iterations in my life, being a lawyer, an expedition tour leader, and I keep winding up watching birds. I can't believe it. I have the best job on the planet.
Is that right?
Well, I'm a penguin counter, for God's sake. Can't beat that, can you?
No, I don't think you can. From the PBS NewsHour, this is The Last Continent, a 4-part journey to Antarctica. I'm William Brangham. Over the decades that you've been coming here counting all these birds, do you have any sense of a cumulative number, how many penguins you've actually counted?
That's an unbelievably difficult question. It's like asking me how many times I've crossed the Drake Passage. I don't know. Undoubtedly hundreds of millions.
Ron mostly works here on the peninsula, which is the 800-mile-long stretch of land off the continent's northwest corner. He studies gentoos, which are the size of upright footballs, white on the belly, black on the back, orange on the beak. The other penguins are adelies and chinstraps, both a little smaller than the gentoos. Adelies are known for the distinctive white ring around their eyes. Chinstraps get their name for the little black line running across their faces.
It's not uncommon for us to just sit down. I do this all the time. I mean, these are the most glorious creatures on the planet. They're teaching me a lot, but they're really funny. They're like little human beings. They're waddling around all the time. They look kind of silly and all that stuff, but they're just cute as hell, and I love spending time watching their behaviors.
Ron's right. When they're tottering around on land, balancing with their two wings, the flightless penguins seem kind of out of place.
So they dip their head in, kind of get used to the water temperature or whatever, and then under the arms, round the flippers, and boom.
The minute the birds enter the water, they transform instantly into the most incredibly fast, aerodynamic, acrobatic swimmers.
Now look at them go underwater. Zoom, zoom, zoom. You look.
I know, it's incredible.
Literally flying underwater.
Gentoos can reach 22 miles per hour underwater. Michael Phelps, he tops out at 6. Ron's watched these birds swim like this a million times before, but standing with him on this beach, you'd think this was his first time.
I could watch this all day.
Me too. Here's my colleague on this trip, Emily Carpeau, describing Ron.
When you see him, he seems so awkward and kind of like a little bit silly. And then you hear him start talking about penguins and the things he's passionate about, and it's just like his exceptional intelligence comes through. And it kind of reminds me, it's like when penguins are on land, they look like they do not belong there and they are not prepared to be dealing with hard land. And then the minute they get into water, you're like, oh, that's what they're meant for.
This guy's going crazy over here. Back and forth and back and forth. Whoa!
I used to think that if I was granted a superpower that flying might be what it is, but I'm starting to think now that maybe to be able to swim like a gentoo might be top of my list.
I'm right there with you, man. They are really, really incredible.
At each penguin colony they visit, Ron and his colleagues are trying to make a literal head count of the birds. How many adults? How many chicks? How many eggs? They're building a year-by-year census of the penguins. Given that the birds can move around, to be as accurate as possible, Ron and his team divide areas into rough grids and count the areas as quickly as possible.
So what I'm going to do is head up to the high ridge and work down to the snow, where the snow comes in. You'll be going up the side here, and we'll meet right at the top.
Yeah, by the time that you get that done.
That's Grant Humphreys. He's a seabird biologist who's working with Ron on this trip. He's a big, burly, bearded guy from Newfoundland.
Antarctic penguins are just unbelievable animals. You know, they've been around for 60 million years, basically to a degree in the same form that you're seeing them now. I mean, you see them here sitting on the rocks. They look like rugby balls. You know, they just don't look like they're made for anything. And here we are on top of this hill here. They've come up from the water and hiked up through deep snow, up over the rocks and all that to get up here. And it's not like they have hands. I mean, they're clawing and fighting their way up. It is spectacular how hardy these animals are. We'll have snowshoes on, our hiking poles and all that, and we'll stream on up to the top of the mountain. We get up there and these guys are beating us. They're just, you know, unfreaking believable. But yeah, I mean...
They are that, no doubt. But just like they don't tell you how rough the seas will be on your way to Antarctica, nobody really tells you how bad these penguin colonies smell. The term of art for penguin poop is guano, but that does not do it justice. It's everywhere, caked on the rocks, all over our boots, permeating our clothes. It smells awful. Here's Emily again, and our other colleague, Mike Fritz.
what's funny is I don't think that I had any idea of just how much there would be and then how they would kind of wear it themselves with such
Right.
dignity.
Yeah.
I mean, they would just kind of have it on their chest and they didn't really care.
Right. If anyone has seen those pictures of the penguins and you see their sort of red or white splotches all over their chest, it's not mud.
Yeah.
It's
Feces.
not mud. It can be a difficult life here for the penguins. While it's summertime now and a balmy 20 degrees Fahrenheit, winters are 5 below zero with fierce winds. And there's predators everywhere. Big gray seabirds called skuas circle overhead constantly, always ready to dive down and grab a chick or a warm egg. In the sea, where the penguins spend most of their lives, there's killer whales and leopard seals. In fact, Grant spotted one when we were on Cooverville Island.
So there's a leopard seal right now cruising towards us, somewhere underwater. His head came up a few minutes ago, possibly hunting, which would be very, very cool.
Hunting our little gentoo friends?
Hunting our little gentoo friends and then ripping him to shreds. The goal is to actually skin the bird because they don't want to eat the feathers and skin. It's not so delectable as the innards. And they'll thrash them until basically all you're left is a muscular figure of a penguin floating in the water, and then they'll start ripping into it. It's very, very violent and very bloody, and it's so primal.
It's been like this for the penguins for millennia, and they've survived and thrived. But now, human-induced climate change is also transforming the Antarctic Peninsula, and Ron and other researchers believe it's taking a toll on the penguins. For decades, this region has been one of the fastest warming spots in the world.
Right here in the Antarctic Peninsula, there's been a warming trend over the last 6 decades or more. It's actually the most amount of warming on the planet other than in the high Arctic.
Right here.
Right here. And it's dramatic. It's 3 degrees centigrade, 5 degrees Fahrenheit on a year-round basis.
At the same time, certain penguin colonies have also been hit hard.
I also, because I've been coming here for so long, I've seen these changes. I've seen the penguin populations at certain colonies thin out pretty dramatically. One colony that we studied at Deception Island has gone from an estimated 90,000 breeding pairs to 50 or fewer, 50,000 or fewer.
90,000 down to 50.
Yes.
That's a huge drop.
Right.
Just for reference, that's like Tallahassee, Florida, losing almost half its population.
So you've got to suspect strongly that climate is implicated. But precisely how that's sorting out is going to be a very complicated question.
Now, there's no direct link that warmer temperatures are what are causing these declines, but researchers point to several pieces of circumstantial evidence. The penguin's main food source is a small shrimp-like creature called krill. They're about the size of your pinky finger, and everything down here eats them. Krill is also commercially harvested for fish food and human supplements, but climate change can harm them too, and their numbers are down. Claire Christian runs the Antarctic and Southern Ocean Coalition, an advocacy group.
There are some species in the Antarctic, like whales, that can travel thousands of miles. When penguins are, raising their chicks, they can only go so far every day before they have to go back and feed the chick. So if there isn't krill within the area that they can travel to, they're at risk of losing those chicks for the year.
Ron says his data indicate the adeles and the chin straps have taken these changes very hard, but the gentoos, on the other hand, seem to be thriving. Ron says gentoos can swim a little further and a little deeper, which gives them more range, but they've also diversified their diet, and they're starting to eat more fish. All the penguins here could eat more fish, but only the gentoos seem to be doing it.
The gentoos have really made the big switch. The adeles and chin straps just haven't apparently picked up on the fact they need to start eating more of it. I keep thinking that it'd be great to converse with these guys and say, eat more fish, but I don't speak adelie or chin strap.
The warming environment has also triggered a seemingly contradictory effect on the Antarctic Peninsula. It's triggering more snowfall, which can cover the birds' nests and disrupt their breeding. But again, the gentoos seem to be adapting by laying their eggs a second time.
I think it highlights that there are going to be climate change winners and there's going to be some climate change losers.
Heather Lynch is an evolutionary biologist from Stony Brook University in New York, and she's one of Ron's regular research partners. We met her in Argentina just as she'd finished her latest trip to Antarctica.
What's surprising is how similar these three species of penguins are. They breed in the same places, they largely eat the same things, they're breeding at the same time, they lay 2 eggs. So what's surprising to me is that the very small, subtle differences that they do have are actually the difference between being a climate change winner and a climate change loser. So one of the real take-home messages here, I think, from the Gentoo penguin's perspective is that flexibility and plasticity is going to be really key to adapting and even thriving in a climate change environment. And I think there's a real lesson for us as people, as communities, as cities. We're all going to have to figure out what's going to work in the future. And it may look very different than what's worked in the past.
Penguins are us, you might say. They breathe the same air. They have to have food, a good home, a good environment. If one of those falls out of sync, it's troubling. So my question, you might say, in a very general, euphemistic way, are we going to be gentoos in the future? Or are we going to have a sinking population like some of the chinstrap and Adelie populations? I'm really concerned.
Meaning, are we going to figure out either how to stop this warming or how to adapt to it?
I don't know if we're going to be able to stop it. What I've been focusing a lot upon is whether we're going to be able to adapt.
On our last day in Antarctica with Ron and Grant, we visited a chinstrap penguin colony. It's cold and windy, and the rain has mixed the dirt and guano together into a sticky, stinky soup. But the two men are in their usual playful mood, happy to show off their best chinstrap impressions.
I guess we're not going to get it on this season, Grant.
No, I don't think so. I think we're failed breeders.
Failed breeders.
Failed breeders.
Chinstraps are Ron's favorite. They're the first penguins he ever saw here, but he also loves them because they're tenacious.
Chinstrap penguins run right up to you. They want to see your passport, where you're from, who are you. Then they back off.
Do you think these guys know that they're your favorite?
I would have to be honest and say no. I don't speak chinstrap, nor do they speak English. But I must say, in my quiet moments, I do go into my and I sometimes get a response. So I'd like to think that some of my guys know who I am.
There's some cross-species communication going on.
Yeah, I guess so, but I'm dreaming.
At 73, after doing this for nearly half of his life, Ron Naveen says he's not ready for this work to be over.
I get very wistful and teary-eyed, to be honest. It's my last day in the Antarctic for this season. I do want to come back. I'm intending to come back. I've been doing this forever. I'm not ready to hang up the penguin clicker. But I'll have a few moments later this afternoon with my favorite guys, sitting down there communing with them. I'll go back to the ship and have a big fat smile on my face. I'm the luckiest guy on the planet.
On the next episode, for thousands of years, Antarctica was just an idea.
You have these old maps which show a version of Antarctica, usually referred to as Terra Australis Incognita, the great unknown southern continent.
How a couple of bottles of Ukrainian vodka,
Prost, Prost, Prost.
11 babies, and one Cold War diplomatic treaty helped tell the story of Antarctica's past and present.
Even between two extreme adversaries like the Soviet Union and the United States, you could in fact declare some areas off limits to that kind of rivalry.
That's on the next episode of The Last Continent. If you want to see Antarctica and those charming penguins and meet Ron and Grant and everyone we talked with, visit our website, pbs.org/newshour/The Last Continent. There you can find our video series that first aired on the NewsHour broadcast, plus other photographs and extras. And to hear all 4 episodes of The Last Continent, make sure to subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Last Continent was produced by Vika Aronson, Mike Fritz, Emily Carpeau, and me, William Brangham. Editing by Erica R. Hendry. Production assistance by Chris Ford. Fact-checking was done by Sikon Akpan, Maya Lene Bura, Amber Partida, and Zoe Rorick. Music by Blue Dot Sessions. Special thanks to Travis Daub, Vanessa Dennis, Brennan Butler, Stefan Rode, James Williams, Julia Griffin, Dan Cooney, Dima Zane, Malia Posey, Adam Saraf, and Laura Strum. Thanks also to Dan Devaney and Bruce Kane at WETA-FM. Sarah Just is our executive producer. Thanks so much for listening. And please don't forget to let us know what you think of the show. Tweet us at NewsHour or leave us a review in Apple Podcasts.
I do consider myself very proudly a chinstrap penguin.
And how about your friendly NewsHour crew?
Well, one of you, my dear Emily, is certainly a chinstrap and higher up on the boisterous scale than I am. You guys are more in the Gentoo category, just such nice gentlemanly guys. But Emily and I have you figured out, and we know how to nail you if we have to.
All right, I'm just trying to work out if we're going to do better to retrace our steps and try and find another path cutting across.
Copy that.
In Antarctica, it's ice and ocean as far as the eye can see. There are no roads, no hotels, there's no government. Right now, we're in a little boat full of tourists trying to make our way to the closest thing to civilization on Antarctica, one of the many scientific research bases that are dotted around the continent. We're hoping to reach a Ukrainian base called Vernadsky, but it's not easy. We're having to ram our way through incredibly thick sea ice in what's called a zodiac. It's a glorified rubber dinghy. There are big, heavy chunks of ice bobbing on the water. There's so much ice, you can barely even see the water.
We get in the Zodiac, and it is like the craziest puzzle getting around these huge pieces of ice.
My colleague, Emily Carpeau.
You could see Vernadsky. It was like less than half a mile, you know?
It's nearly all sea ice. There's some broken up bergy bits, but most of it is sea ice.
Expedition leader David McGonigal is driving our boat. He's guided tours in Antarctica for decades.
Okay, we'll just get some stuff off and we can pull it over.
We made it through. We just pulled up. There's a Ukrainian gentleman saying, "Welcome, welcome." A bunch of Gentoo penguins along the shoreline greeting us here, wondering who the hell these people are coming out.
No problem.
For the PBS NewsHour, this is The Last Continent, a 4-part journey to Antarctica. I'm William Brangham.
Oh, careful with that one. And passports.
The tourists get out of the Zodiac and head up the wooden walkway to the base, which is really just 5 or 6 low-slung buildings stuck on a rocky ledge.
Hello.
Hello, thank you.
A few of the 11 Ukrainian scientists who live here come out to greet us. 1 or 2 are bleary-eyed and unshaven, almost like cavemen coming out of the woods. They haven't seen other people for nearly a year, and they've been living off canned food for that long too. So we brought some gifts. What was the total of what we brought?
I think 50 kilo of onions, 8 kilo of garlic, and 2 cartons of beer.
It's a nice peace offering.
Yeah.
We file into the main building to get out of the cold. They'll stamp your passports if you want, sort of proof that you were actually there. Vernadsky was originally occupied in 1947 by the British and then sold to the Ukrainians 50 years later. It's been the site of some really important science. Back in the 1980s, this is where scientists first discovered the hole in the ozone layer. Remember that?
The ozone, which protects the Earth from the sun's harmful ultraviolet rays, was being eaten away by CFCs.
That discovery helped lead to the global ban on chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. That changed everyone's hairspray and refrigerators and air conditioning. And in time, the hole in the ozone was largely repaired.
Получається, що на 3,5 градуса середньодобово.
Today, the scientists at Vernadsky are studying penguins and glaciers, they're tracking the climate. But the base's other claim to fame is having one of the southernmost bars on Earth.
Cheers. Prost, Prost, Prost.
The house special, homemade Ukrainian vodka distilled with Antarctic ice.
It doesn't burn. It's. I spoke too soon.
These scientific bases, some bigger, some smaller, some with bars, are really the only structures on Antarctica. And apart from tourism and some commercial fishing offshore, science is what humans do on this ice-covered continent. That's no accident. In 1961, at the height of the Cold War, 12 nations, including the US and the Soviet Union, reached a unique diplomatic breakthrough. They signed what's known as the Antarctic Treaty. It outlawed all military exercises and nuclear testing on the continent, and it put science front and center, saying researchers from any signatory nation can come and do research wherever they want.
I think the Antarctic Treaty found two issues that really resonated internationally at the time, one of which was cooperation in science.
That's Tucker Scully. He worked for years on polar issues for the U.S. State Department.
And secondly, the idea that you could, in fact, create areas that were off limits to military activities. And even between two extreme adversaries like the Soviet Union and the United States, you could, in fact, declare some areas off limits to that kind of rivalry. And it worked. And continues to work.
And these nations have gone above and beyond just a peaceful relationship. They've also added environmental regulations to protect the continent. By no means was this the obvious outcome. It could have gone a very different way. Before the treaty, a lot of nations came to Antarctica and tried to claim different parts for themselves. But instead, the spirit of scientific cooperation prevailed. That was once we actually discovered Antarctica. For most of human history, this icy continent was more theory than fact.
So Antarctica has existed as a theory long before anybody actually set eyes on the continent itself.
That's polar historian Katie Murray.
You have these old maps which show a version of Antarctica, usually referred to as Terra Australis Incognita, the great unknown southern continent, hundreds of years before man had actually sighted the place.
Why did people think that it had to exist?
This is to do with some ideas that our ancestors had about the shape of the world. They knew there was these great big land masses in the northern hemisphere, and so there had to be an equivalent in the southern hemisphere. They knew there was an Arctic, and so there had to be an anti-Arctic or an Antarctic.
Did that theory make sense? Does it make sense that if there is a polar region, that there must be a region here at the bottom of the world?
I have no idea.
Turns out, no. There's no geophysical rule that planets must have two identical poles. They don't have to match top and bottom. But Katie is right. For thousands of years, as empires came and went and built civilizations on every other continent on the planet, Antarctica remained a mystery, an unknown land at the bottom of the world. That changed in part because of these majestic mammals. Several dozen humpback whales are putting on quite a show for this boat full of tourists.
The whole front portion came out. All right. Thank you, Will.
We are literally surrounded by whales. People just don't know where to turn to see. To be this close to these huge 50-ton mammals is a big part of why tourists come here today. And 200 years ago, these same whales attracted some of the very first people to ever come to Antarctica. But they came for a very different reason.
Whale oil was, critical part of the economy, and essentially, in the 1600s, whales were washing up on Nantucket. If you were a whaler, you just walk out your backyard and there's a whale, they're on the shore.
That's Alexandra Eisern from the National Science Foundation. She says seals and whales became a big lure for hunters.
But as that got fished out, people had to go farther and farther and farther, and so they'd already been in the Arctic. And the next step was exploring the southern hemisphere and down to Antarctica.
And so a brief Antarctic gold rush began. American and British and Norwegian hunters came here and killed hundreds of thousands of whales for their oil. Whale oil was used in lamps and streetlights all over the world. It was a big business. This British archival film details what the industry on Antarctica was like.
The bone, meat and entrails were loaded into the 36 pressure cookers to extract as much oil as possible, and the waste bones were crushed down for fertilizer.
You still see remnants today around some of the stations where, particularly in the Antarctic Peninsula, where the whalers would have had a kill and they would render the oil on shore, and all the remains are still there because things don't really decay in that cold environment.
We saw some of these relics on the black sand beaches at Deception Island. The whole place has a haunted feel. Bleached out whale skeletons sit on the beach, not too far from the huge, hulking round tanks that once held thousands of gallons of whale oil. Now they just sit there, rusted and empty. After we tour the old whaling station, we all perform the ritual of Antarctic tourism. We strip off our winter gear and plunge into the frigid ocean.
It's just a little brisk.
The water is so cold you can only spend a few seconds in it. It's basically a dash in and a dash out.
Come on.
My colleague, Mike Fritz, is standing by the water's edge, filming it all.
You're not going to stay in your clothes all day, right?
No, I'm going in here in a second, but I'm actually a bit terrified after watching these people go in.
They look like they're having a ball.
I don't know. That's not my idea of fun.
Emily feels the same.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm as ready as I'm going to be. Definitely do not want to do this.
But we do it. You kind of have to.
That is tremendous.
Arguably the dumbest thing I've ever done.
The whole time, we tried not to think about how we're swimming in what's really a whale graveyard. When the seal and whale populations plummeted, most of the humans stopped coming for a while. Historian Stephen Pine has written extensively about Antarctica, and he says one of the main reasons the continent remained hidden for so long is that it's just an incredibly difficult place to explore.
Antarctica proved exceptionally tricky because all of the things that centuries of exploration by the West had relied on, having native peoples as guides, being able to follow rivers, being able to identify mountains, all this is gone. So whatever you want to live on, to eat and to drink, you will have to carry with you. You are just slammed, in a sense, into this completely alien. It's not even a landscape, it's an ice-scape.
Pine says it took a few more decades into the early 1900s for a new spirit of exploration, driven in part by science, to bring humans back to Antarctica. Antarctic explorers wanted to be the first to find the magnetic South Pole, to be the first to cross the continent from end to end. This whole era is called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration.
That era just was an extraordinary outpouring. I think there were at least 9 nations, even Japan sent an expedition. This was how you showed that you were a scientific presence, and Antarctica was the place to do it.
Polar historian Katie Murray again.
This is the time of Shackleton, of the race to the pole between Scott and Amundsen, of Mawson. This is a period of a lot of these really good adventure stories.
Remember, in the early 1900s, Antarctica was essentially a continent up for grabs. And as different nations went deeper and deeper into the continent, science was also used to help make land claims. Here's Tucker Scully again.
All the early explorers that went down there also were given permission by their governments to make claims. In those days, you could put up a flag, but that really didn't mean anything.
Most nations would build a small scientific base, like Vernadsky, to establish their claim. But some other countries took it a little bit further. Argentina has been in a long dispute with Chile and the UK over a particular slice of land in Antarctica. And so, in 1977, Argentina airlifted a pregnant woman to its base in Antarctica. 2 months later, an Argentinian was the first recorded human ever born on the continent. Baby Emilio Palma, 7 pounds, 8 ounces, was born January 7th, 1978. But unfortunately for Argentina, according to international law, baby Emilio doesn't really help their claim. Being born in a place doesn't really grant you rights to that place. But that hasn't stopped the baby race one bit. At least 11 more babies have been born on the continent. 8 Argentinians, 3 Chileans. Interestingly, the Antarctic Treaty didn't address sovereignty claims either. It just skipped right over the issue.
The Antarctic Treaty is, in effect, a gentleman's agreement, but it's one that seems to be working incredibly well.
But some of the treaty's protections, like the ban on oil and gas drilling, expire in 2048. So there's some worry that this could lead to a whole new kind of competition in Antarctica. This continent has up to 90% of the world's fresh water frozen in its ice, and potentially has vast, untapped natural resources below that ice. But Claire Christian of the Antarctic and Southern Ocean Coalition argues that the success of the Antarctic Treaty, with its spirit of scientific cooperation between nations, won't allow that to happen.
I think there is a very strong ethos that has been developed among these countries that they are responsible for the Antarctic. Antarctica is really the world's last great wilderness. It's a continent that is for nature. And I think that's a really important symbol because, so many other places where human civilization has spread to, we have destroyed the environment, we've polluted the air, we've polluted our water. A lot of countries are justifiably proud of what they've achieved in Antarctica in terms of preserving it as a place for peace and science. And I think that that is something that they don't want to go back on.
How does it taste?
Good. It's hard to describe, but it's getting warmer as it's getting down further.
Back at the Vernadsky base where we first began, the various threads of present-day Antarctica are milling together at the bar. Tourists from 5 different continents are chatting with scientists from 4 different countries. Grant Humphreys, the penguin scientist from episode 2, he's playing blackbird on a mandolin at the back of the room. Beside the bar hang old black and white photos of a few of the great explorers from Antarctica's past. And Ron Naveen, our other penguin researcher from episode 2, is also here. He's chatting with a Ukrainian biologist who's pouring the drinks. Through a translator, I asked the biologist if he'll share the recipe for their homemade vodka.
So he says it's a big secret. He's interested, curious. Are they going to ask something about penguins?
We don't care about the penguins. We're only here for the alcohol.
Coming up in our final episode, Antarctica was discovered in part because the world wanted whale oil. The concern now is that our modern-day thirst for a different oil is causing more of Antarctica's ice to disappear every year.
I can still remember the first day I appreciated that the ice could change fast.
It's becoming clearer that parts of Antarctica appear to be unstable and are losing ice much faster than we expected.
How that could impact coastal communities thousands of miles away.
Let's start thinking straight. It's going to be expensive and it's going to be disruptive if we don't get our act together now.
That's on the next episode of The Last Continent. If you want to see Antarctica and those whales and that bar at the Vernadsky station and meet Katie Murray and everyone else, visit our website, pbs.org/newshour/thelastcontinent. There you can find our video series that first aired on the NewsHour broadcast, plus other photographs and extras. And to hear all 4 episodes of The Last Continent, make sure to subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Last Continent was produced by Vika Aronson, Mike Fritz, Emily Carpeau, and me, William Brangham. Editing by Erica R. Hendry. Production assistance by Chris Ford. Fact-checking was done by Sikon Akpan, Maya Lene Bura, Amber Partida, and Zoe Rorick. Music by Blue Dot Sessions. Special thanks to Travis Daub, Vanessa Dennis, Brennan Butler, Stefan Rode, James Williams, Julia Griffin, Dan Cooney, Dima Zane, Malia Posey, Adam Saraf, and Laura Strum. and to the UK Antarctic Heritage Trust for giving us permission to use footage from their film Whalers Bay, Deception Island, A Brief History. Thanks also to Dan Devaney and Bruce Kane at WETA FM. Sarah Just is our executive producer. Thanks so much for listening. And please don't forget to let us know what you think of the show. Tweet us at NewsHour or leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. At first, they appear out of nowhere, tiny white shapes on the gray horizon. But as you get closer, you realize that's ice. We're on the deck of a large ship, slowly cruising along the coast of Antarctica, and I just can't stop staring at these jaw-droppingly beautiful icebergs. They come in every shape imaginable: arches, walls, diamonds balancing on their tips. Some of them are quite small. Others are as big as entire cities, towering 20 or 30 stories above the ocean. These huge pieces of ice were once securely attached to the Antarctic continent. And now they're just out here, riding the currents of the Southern Ocean. From the PBS NewsHour, this is The Last Continent, a 4-part journey to Antarctica. I'm William Brangham. The fact is, icebergs have been breaking off Antarctica for millions of years. It's part of the natural cycle of how ice gets made and unmade on Earth. But now, in a warming world, it's hard to not also see these icebergs as something much more ominous, because we know Antarctica's ice is now slipping away faster and faster. One recent study showed it's disappearing 6 times faster than just 40 years ago.
I can still remember the first day I appreciated that the ice could change fast.
Robin Bell works at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, and she has been studying the ice on both Antarctica and Greenland for decades. She says a few years ago, she got an alarming call from one of her colleagues about some data from Greenland that had just come in.
It was one of these memories that's burned into your head. You could hear the fear in his voice. He's saying the ice is changing faster than we thought it could. And that moment is like seared into my brain, because you aren't supposed to hear fear in scientists. We thought that ice changed really slowly, that it would take eons. And suddenly we're seeing it can retreat, it can drop, it can speed up, it can lose mass really quickly.
That data, along with many subsequent studies over the years, have helped convince scientists that as we keep burning oil and gas and coal and all that carbon goes up into the atmosphere and warms up the planet, the world's ice is reacting. Antarctica's ice is reacting.
So the signal from the ice sheets is the poster child for our changing climate, because we can see it as human beings. We can't see CO2 changing, but we can see the ice sheets that are responding to the warming ocean and the warming atmosphere. We can see their signal.
Just from this surface map alone, is there clearly 2 very deep fjords
there? Interesting.
That, if the ice sheet margin were here, those would...
7,000 miles from Antarctica, in a big office complex in Maryland, a team of scientists and researchers at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center is trying to measure precisely how much of Antarctica's ice is being lost.
I'm Joseph McGregor. I prefer Joe, and I'm a glaciologist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, and I'm also project scientist for NASA's Operation Icebridge.
For several years, Joe's team at NASA has been flying back and forth over the continent, shooting radar and ground-penetrating lasers down onto the ice. The goal is to figure out how thick it is, how fast it's moving, and whether it's growing or shrinking.
Hopefully a sea ice. I said 200 flight, the very first one ever. Hopefully. Sea ice. Yes.
Yeah, that's nice.
What we found is that some places are thinning by several feet, in some cases even tens of feet, per year. And that is indicative of a rapid retreat and that this system is overall out of balance.
It's sort of like a crude version of a bank account, meaning how
Exactly.
much money are you adding to it in the form of ice versus how much are you losing in the form of melt.
Exactly. And so what we now know is that those bank accounts are in deficit for both Greenland and Antarctica. And Antarctica is now losing 252 gigatons of ice per year.
So what does that mean, 252 gigatons of ice per year? As with everything Antarctic, scale is really hard to convey. But here's one measure. In just the amount of time it takes to listen to this episode, about 15 minutes, Antarctica will have lost about 1.7 billion gallons worth of ice. That's nearly twice as much water as the millions of people in New York City use each day. Gone. Now, this doesn't mean that all of Antarctica's ice is going to disappear. No serious researcher says that that's on the near horizon. But if the atmosphere and the oceans continue to warm, melting ice could flood the homes and cities where millions and millions of people now live. Here's Princeton University's Michael Oppenheimer. He's a longtime participant in the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
It's becoming clearer that parts of Antarctica appear to be unstable and are losing ice much faster than we expected. So ultimately, if we lose all the ice that's vulnerable to a warming of only a few degrees, we're talking about a very, very, very big sea level rise.
A trillion-ton iceberg, which we're just hearing has broken off Antarctica.
Remember the stories you've been hearing about Antarctica?
Shelves in the West Antarctic are shrinking a lot faster than they realized.
Scientists are predicting a 110-mile sheet of ice, a chunk the size of the state of Delaware, will break off Antarctica in the coming days or weeks.
Those are all stories about Antarctica's ice shelves coming apart. An ice shelf is a platform of ice that grows out from the huge glaciers that sit perched on the perimeter of Antarctica. Think of a baseball cap. The big round part that fits on your head, that's the glacier. The bill is the shelf sticking out into the ocean. If you hang out with glaciologists and others who study ice long enough, you'll keep hearing the metaphor of the glass of ice water. It's a good one, okay? So imagine a glass full of ice water in front of you. When the ice melts, your glass doesn't overflow because the ice was already displacing the water. And so when one of those big ice shelves in Antarctica breaks up, that also does not cause sea level rise because just like your glass, the ice was already in the water. But those ice shelves coming apart can set off a chain reaction that can cause some very serious sea level rise.
If the ice shelves go away, the ice will flow faster into the ocean.
Robin Bell says those shelves, some of which are as big as Texas, help bolster the glaciers they're connected to. They kind of keep them propped up on the land. You take away the shelf, those glaciers start moving more quickly down to the water.
So you can imagine a piece of ice the size of Texas, pretty thick, is going to slow the ice as it tries to flow into the ocean. They're essentially acting as bouncers in the bar, leaning up against the door and keeping the ice from flowing into the ocean.
This exact dynamic occurred in 2002. The Larsen B ice shelf disintegrated, and the glaciers behind it began moving faster towards the ocean. And when a glacier moves into the ocean, that can cause really big sea level rise. Think back to your glass of ice water. If you suddenly add new ice to it, now it overflows. That overflowing is sea level rise. Some of the people who've been studying Antarctica's ice say that there are two glaciers on the west coast, the Pine Island Glacier and the Thwaites Glacier, that are truly worrying. The shelves in front of them have been thinning and breaking up, and the glaciers are now moving.
It's definitely Thwaites and its adjacent glacier, Pine Island. That region in the Amundsen Sea is really moving quite fast.
Alexandra Eisern is with the National Science Foundation. She says some glaciologists believe those glaciers might have already passed the point of no return, meaning No matter what we do now, even if everyone switched to electric cars and we all moved to 100% clean energy today, some of these colossal structures of ice are already destined to slip into the ocean.
Fast. And some researchers already speculate that we've gone beyond this place where they're going to start catastrophically failing. And the amount of water above sea level, which when it melts then raises sea level, is quite substantial. It's many tens of meters.
Michael Oppenheimer notes that if just one of these glaciers were to end up in the ocean, the UN's predictions of about 1 foot of sea level rise by the end of the century will look optimistic in the extreme.
The current estimates are if the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica were to totally disintegrate into the ocean, that ultimately sea level would rise by something like 5 feet. And that much sea level rise would be very, very difficult and expensive to defend against. In areas around some of our biggest cities, New York, Boston, Miami, where you've got a lot of development, homes, buildings, infrastructure like roads, right up by the coast, very close to sea level. How do you defend those? Certain areas like New York City, they're going to protect Manhattan. The real estate is too valuable. But how would Bangladesh protect itself? It's got many hundreds of miles of coastline. It's all right at sea level. You can't build a wall to protect that whole coast.
2 years ago, we saw how quickly Bangladesh could flood. The heavy rains that fell on Southeast Asia in 2017 killed about 1,200 people. All that water flooded a third of Bangladesh. Think of that. A third of a country where 150 million people live was underwater. The damage was immense.
The death toll from monsoon flooding across South Asia surged again to more than 1,200.
It's caused the worst flooding in decades, and it's led to a massive humanitarian crisis across the entire region.
Oppenheimer says sea level rise could make flooding like that permanent. It could force huge numbers of people in Bangladesh from their homes.
That's millions of people that are going to have to move.
Right, and where are they going to go in such a densely populated country? And there's already strife when people try to move into India. People get killed trying to do that now. What's going to happen when you have a few million people that all of a sudden try to move? It's not a pretty picture.
Of course, Bangladesh is just one low-lying country on Earth. There are many more. Many of the world's biggest cities are right at sea level. Huge cities in India and China, not to mention the U.S., all places that are vulnerable to an even small rise in the ocean.
So the world has to get used to this idea that people are going to be moving due to sea level rise. So it doesn't mean we should all throw up our hands and run, but it means two things. Number one, we have to focus a lot of scientific effort on what's going on. And number two, regardless, we know sea level is rising, we know it's accelerating, we know we're going to have to protect certain areas, we know we're going to have to abandon other areas. Let's start thinking straight, let's start thinking fast about how we're going to help people, because a lot of it is not going to be pretty, it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be disruptive if we don't get our act together now.
My colleagues Emily Carpeau and Mike Fritz were on this trip to Antarctica with me, and we talked a lot about the dichotomy of Antarctica, how such a jaw-droppingly beautiful place could also hold such a looming threat. Here's Mike.
Several people asked me when I got back, it was like, oh God, I bet that was terrifying to see what you saw down there in Antarctica. I mean, it looks just, like, is it just awful, like what's going on? And it was like, while you're there, you don't really have any idea.
People were saying, wasn't it awful, meaning to see glaciers like falling into the ocean?
Yeah, like I think they thought like you would just see, you know, that all the ice you would see and it was just melting. But it was a textbook tour of Antarctica. I mean, there was nothing that I'd ever seen like Antarctica. I mean, there was literally nothing that kind of prepares you for just how breathtaking that place is.
It didn't feel like anything was happening, but I do, like, distinctly remember thinking, like, you could not quantify the loss that it would be if it wasn't there anymore. I feel like the experience I had going there is something that I wish everyone could experience. And the idea that that kind of beauty wouldn't exist anymore, I found just like deeply depressing.
We spent our last day on the ship back from Antarctica with Ron Naveen. He's the longtime penguin researcher who we first met in episode 2.
I find it incomprehensible that somebody could come to the Antarctic and not be touched by what they see.
Ron's been studying the birds on the continent for almost 40 years, and he has seen how climate change might be hurting them too. He argues that the more people see of Antarctica, the more they learn about it and its wildlife and its ice, the more they'll be moved to act in ways that protect it.
There's certainty now that climate change is happening. And the message the penguins, I think, are sending me and sending all of us is that we really have to be courageous, all of us. We're all in this boat together. And I would hope that us humans, who actually think a heck of a lot more than penguins do, penguins don't do a lot of reasoning in that little pea brain.
No long-term planning.
No long-term planning in those heads. They've figured out how to survive. It seems to me that us humans who actually can think about this, if they have the right tools and the right understanding and their hearts in the right place, we can think of a better way to take care of ourselves in the future.
If you want to actually see what Antarctica looks like, the ice, the penguins, plus all the people we talk to, visit our website, pbs.org/newshour/thelastcontinent. There you can find our video series that first aired on the NewsHour broadcast, plus other photographs and extras. And to hear all 4 episodes of The Last Continent, make sure to subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Last Continent was produced by Vika Aronson, Mike Fritz, Emily Carpeau, and me, William Brangham. Editing by Erica R. Hendry. Production assistance by Chris Ford. Fact-checking was done by Sikon Akpan, Maya Lene Bura, Amber Partida, and Zoe Rorick. Music by Blue Dot Sessions. Special thanks to Travis Daub, Vanessa Dennis, Brennan Butler, Stefan Rode, James Williams, Julia Griffin, Dan Cooney, Dima Zane, Malia Posey, Adam Saraf, and Laura Strum. Thanks also to Dan Devaney and Bruce Kane at WETA-FM. Sarah Just is our executive producer. Thanks so much for listening. And please don't forget to let us know what you think of the show. Tweet us at NewsHour or leave us a review in Apple Podcasts.